August 12, 1944. Versailles, France. Inside a commandeered chateau that served as Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, General Dwight Eisenhower stared at a map that told two contradictory stories. Blue arrows showed his armies racing across France at a pace that exceeded every pre-invasion estimate. Red circles marked supply depots that couldn't keep up. The gap between the two was widening by the hour. 76 days after D-Day, the Allied advance had become a victim of its own success. General George Patton's Third Army was devouring France, moving so fast that German forces barely had time to establish defensive positions. In 2 weeks, Patton had advanced nearly 200 miles. His tanks rolled forward with an appetite that seemed unstoppable. But tanks don't run on ambition. They run on gasoline, and gasoline was running out. The numbers told a stark story. Each of Patton's armored divisions consumed 400,000 gallons of fuel per day. His entire army needed 800,000 gallons daily just to maintain momentum. Behind them, Omar Bradley's First Army required similar amounts. The mathematics of modern warfare had shifted from battlefield tactics to logistical calculus, and the equation wasn't balancing. The ports told their own tragedy. Cherbourg, captured in late June, lay in ruins. German demolition teams had been thorough, systematic, merciless. Every crane destroyed, every dock cratered, harbor channels blocked with sunken vessels. Engineers worked around the clock, but restoration moved at a fraction of the speed required. The great port of Antwerp, closer to the advancing armies and capable of handling the volume needed, remained in German hands. Between the coast and the front lines stretched 300 miles of French roads, most damaged by years of occupation and weeks of bombardment. Into this gap drove the trucks, 10,000 vehicles moving in an endless loop from Normandy beaches to forward positions and back. They called it the Red Ball Express, named after railroad terminology for priority freight. The trucks traveled marked routes, designated by red balls painted on signs every mile. Nothing else could use these roads. The Red Ball had absolute priority. The convoys moved in formations that military doctrine had refined over decades, 20 trucks traveling together, maintaining tight spacing for security and coordination. Officers believed concentration provided protection. If attacked, the convoy could defend itself. If one truck broke down, others could assist. The logic seemed unassailable. It was also killing them. German Luftwaffe pilots had learned to recognize the patterns. From altitude, the convoys appeared as dark chains stretching along French roads, clearly visible, impossible to miss. A single Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf making a strafing run could hit multiple vehicles in seconds. Machine gun fire would rake the length of the convoy. One truck catching fire would block the road, trapping others. What began as a protective formation became a killing field. Sergeant John Kowalski watched another convoy burn from a distance that felt simultaneously too close and not close enough. 34 years old, broad-shouldered, with hands that carried the calluses of a man who'd spent 15 years wrestling steering wheels before the war. He'd driven delivery trucks across the Midwest, hauling everything from grain to machinery across distances that made European geography seem compact. He understood roads, he understood trucks, and increasingly, he understood that something was fundamentally wrong with how the army was using both. The burning convoy represented more than destroyed vehicles. Each truck carried enough supplies to sustain a company for days. Fuel, ammunition, rations, medical supplies, replacement parts. When a convoy burned, entire units went without. Soldiers rationed ammunition. Tank crews measured fuel by the gallon. Artillery batteries limited fire support. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate loss. Kowalski had seen 7 convoys hit in the past 2 weeks, 73 trucks destroyed, 32 drivers killed. The numbers accumulated in his mind with the precision of someone who'd once calculated fuel efficiency and delivery schedules for profit margins. But these weren't profit margins. These were lives and the potential collapse of the entire offensive. He'd tried explaining it to other drivers. The concentration that doctrine demanded was exactly what made them vulnerable. Spread out, moving independently, trucks would be harder to spot, harder to hit, nearly impossible to destroy in groups. The counter-argument always came back to the same points. What about coordination? What about security? What about command and control? Kowalski's answer remained consistent and was consistently ignored. Coordination mattered less than arrival. Security through dispersion beat security through concentration. Command could control timing rather than spacing. His first formal attempt to present the idea ended in a captain's tent 3 miles behind the front. The officer, fresh from staff college with theories about combined arms warfare and integrated logistics, listened for perhaps 90 seconds before cutting him off. Doctrine existed for reasons. Kowalski's civilian experience didn't translate to military operations. The conversation was over. The sergeant should return to his duties and leave strategic thinking to those trained for it. The rejection stung less than the reasoning. Kowalski didn't disagree that military operations differed from civilian trucking. He disagreed that the difference mattered in this specific case. A truck was a truck. A road was a road. Physics didn't respect rank or doctrine. A concentrated target remained a concentrated target, regardless of the uniforms involved. But challenging military doctrine as a sergeant required more than being right. It required being heard, and being heard required either extraordinary luck or extraordinary persistence. Kowalski had never considered himself particularly lucky. That left persistence as the only option. Behind him, the convoy continued burning. Black smoke rising into the August sky, a signal visible for miles in every direction. Another beacon for German pilots, another failure of doctrine to meet reality, another reason to keep trying. Kowalski watched the black smoke rising in the distance, another convoy burning. Something inside him told him this destruction couldn't continue. But who would listen to a mere truck driver? Just as he was about to return to his vehicle, an officer hurriedly approached and said, "The captain wants to see you. Now." The Red Ball Express operated on a rhythm that became hypnotic through repetition. Every morning at 0500 hours, drivers gathered at staging areas near the beaches. Supply sergeants checked manifests. Mechanics performed final inspections. By 0600, the first convoys rolled out. 20 trucks moving in formation, separated by precisely 50 yards, maintaining speeds between 25 and 30 miles per hour. Kowalski had memorized every aspect of the routine during his first month. The convoys followed identical patterns because patterns meant predictability, and predictability meant efficiency. Military planners loved efficiency. They built entire operational frameworks around it. What they hadn't adequately considered was that enemies also recognized patterns, and patterns meant vulnerability. The Luftwaffe attacks followed their own rhythm. German pilots, stretched thin across multiple fronts, conserved fuel and ammunition for high-value targets. A lone truck barely justified the risk. A convoy of 20 represented an opportunity too valuable to ignore. Intelligence reports indicated German reconnaissance planes surveyed the Red Ball routes each dawn, noting convoy positions, calculating intercept points, radioing coordinates to fighter squadrons. August 15th brought the pattern into sharp focus. Kowalski sat in his cab at a crossroads 12 miles south of Chartres, waiting while MPs directed traffic. 3 convoys had passed in the previous hour, each identical in formation, each following the designated route marked by red balls on roadside signs. The system worked with mechanical precision until it encountered mechanical disruption. At 1340 hours, he heard the engines. 2 Messerschmitt Bf 109s came in low from the east, using the sun for concealment. The first pass targeted a convoy 2 miles north. Kowalski couldn't see the attack, but he heard it. The distinctive rattle of 20mm cannons, the deeper boom of exploding fuel tanks, the secondary detonations as ammunition cooked off. Black smoke rose almost immediately, thick and oily, marking another successful German intercept. The convoy Kowalski was traveling with accelerated, trying to reach the next defensive position before the fighters returned. Standard procedure dictated maintaining formation even under threat. Breaking formation meant breaking coordination. Breaking coordination meant chaos. The manual was explicit on this point. What the manual didn't address was whether coordination mattered when everyone died together in good order. The Messerschmitts returned 18 minutes later. They'd refueled and rearmed at a forward airstrip, probably less than 30 miles away. This time Kowalski watched the entire attack. The lead fighter came in along the road axis, guns already firing, tracers walking up the line of trucks. The first vehicle exploded. The second swerved and crashed. The third driver tried to escape the road but hit soft ground and overturned. The fourth, fifth, and sixth trucks bunched up behind the wreckage, creating a perfect target cluster. The second Messerschmitt made its run from a different angle, catching the rear of the convoy. More explosions, more smoke, more supplies that would never reach the front lines. The entire attack lasted 90 seconds. 8 trucks destroyed, 11 men dead, 3 wounded. The remaining trucks sat immobilized by wreckage blocking the road, waiting for recovery vehicles that would take hours to arrive. Kowalski pulled his truck onto the shoulder and grabbed his notebook. He'd started keeping detailed observations 3 weeks earlier, recording every attack he witnessed or heard about. Date, time, location, convoy size, number of aircraft, casualties, losses. The data accumulated into a pattern that seemed obvious once documented, but remained invisible to officers focused on broader strategic concerns. Every attack followed similar parameters. German pilots targeted formations, not individual vehicles. The tighter the formation, the higher the casualty rate. Convoys that had become strung out due to mechanical issues or navigation errors suffered fewer losses even when attacked. The evidence suggested that everything doctrine demanded actually increased vulnerability rather than reducing it. That evening, back at the staging area, Kowalski tried again. He approached Lieutenant Morrison, a logistics officer responsible for scheduling convoy departures. Morrison had a reputation for listening to enlisted men, a quality rare enough to be noteworthy. Kowalski laid out his observations, showed his data, explained his reasoning. Morrison studied the notebook for several minutes, his expression shifting from polite attention to genuine interest. The data was compelling. The pattern was undeniable. But Morrison's response captured the institutional reality Kowalski was fighting against. "You're probably right, Sergeant. Tactically, dispersion makes sense, but operationally, it's impossible. How do we coordinate departure times for individual trucks? How do we track them? How do we ensure they're not intercepted on isolated roads? How do we maintain accountability? The current system isn't perfect, but it's manageable. What you're proposing requires completely restructuring our entire logistics operation." Kowalski had anticipated the objections. He'd spent hours thinking through solutions. Trucks could depart at staggered intervals, 5 minutes apart. Drivers could be given specific arrival windows rather than formation requirements. Checkpoints could track individual vehicles rather than entire convoys. The system would require more planning, but less physical coordination. Quality over proximity. Morrison shook his head slowly, not in disagreement, but in resignation. "I don't have the authority to approve this. You'd need someone at headquarters level, someone willing to challenge Transportation Corps doctrine. I can forward your data through channels, but I wouldn't expect quick results." The Army doesn't change operational procedures based on field observations from NCOs, no matter how valid those observations might be. The honesty was almost worse than dismissal. Morrison believed Kowalski was right. He simply didn't believe the system would listen. The lieutenant returned the notebook and offered what he probably considered encouragement. Keep documenting. Keep observing. Maybe eventually someone would pay attention. Kowalski took back his notebook and walked to his tent. Around him, other drivers prepared for tomorrow's runs. Same formations, same procedures, same vulnerabilities. The Red Ball Express would roll out again at 600 hours, maintaining doctrine, maintaining predictability, maintaining patterns that enemy pilots had learned to exploit with devastating efficiency. He opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date, August 15th, 1944. Below it, he added a single line, "How many more convoys need to burn before someone listens?" As Kowalski observed the German attacks, something in the back of his mind kept hammering. There's a pattern here. Just as he was about to make a crucial decision about his theory, The radio communication cut through. German pilots detected ahead. Prepare for attack. His idea was about to be put to the test, but he knew time was running out. August turned to September, and the logistical crisis deepened. Patton's Third Army had reached the Moselle River, over 300 miles from the nearest functional port. His tanks sat immobilized, not by German resistance but by empty fuel tanks. Bradley's First Army rationed ammunition so severely that artillery batteries were limited to 10 rounds per day. The Allied advance, which had seemed unstoppable in July, ground to a halt in what historians would later call the logistics pause. Kowalski's notebook grew thicker. 23 attacks documented, 147 trucks destroyed, 81 casualties. The numbers represented conservative estimates based only on incidents he personally witnessed or heard reliable reports about. The actual figures were certainly higher. Each entry included details: convoy size, spacing between vehicles, terrain features, weather conditions, time of day, direction of attack, results. The pattern remained consistent. Concentrated formations suffered catastrophic losses. Dispersed vehicles, whether by accident or necessity, survived at dramatically higher rates. A convoy that had spread out due to mechanical problems reported only 2 trucks lost, despite 3 attack passes. Another formation, caught while vehicles were still assembling, lost just 1 truck because the others were too scattered to target efficiently. The evidence was overwhelming. The institutional response was silence. September 4th brought a breakthrough, though not the kind Kowalski had been seeking. A major attack hit 3 convoys simultaneously near Reims. German fighters, operating in coordinated groups, destroyed 31 trucks in less than 10 minutes. The losses represented nearly 15% of the day's entire supply delivery. Wounded drivers described fighters making multiple passes, encountering no resistance, methodically working through formations that couldn't scatter and couldn't defend themselves. The attack finally generated attention at headquarters level, not because of the tactical failure, but because the supply shortage was now threatening strategic objectives. Eisenhower faced a fundamental choice: halt the advance entirely to rebuild logistics, or continue forward with inadequate supplies and risk operational collapse. Neither option was acceptable. The situation demanded innovation. Kowalski learned about the headquarters response from Captain Weber, his immediate commanding officer. Weber had received orders to compile comprehensive data on convoy losses for staff review. Someone senior was asking questions. Someone wanted answers. Weber, remembering previous conversations with Kowalski, requested his notebook. "I need everything you've documented," Weber said. "Times, locations, circumstances, your analysis. They're forming a committee to study the logistics problem. Your data might actually reach people who can make decisions." Kowalski handed over the notebook but felt no optimism. Committees studied problems. They generated reports. Reports went to other committees. Meanwhile, trucks kept burning and drivers kept dying. The bureaucracy of war moved at a pace that bore no relationship to the urgency of combat. 3 days later, Weber returned the notebook with unexpected news. "Your data caught someone's attention. Major General Walter Bedell Smith wants to see you. Tomorrow, 0900 hours at SHAEF headquarters." Smith was Eisenhower's chief of staff, a notoriously demanding officer with a reputation for explosive temper and intolerance for incompetence. He was also known for pragmatism that cut through bureaucratic resistance. If Smith wanted to discuss convoy tactics with a sergeant, the issue had reached the highest operational levels. Kowalski spent the evening preparing. He reviewed his data, organized his thoughts, anticipated objections. He'd spent 2 months being dismissed, ignored, or politely encouraged to focus on driving rather than planning. This might be his only opportunity to present his case to someone with actual authority to implement change. The chateau serving as SHAEF headquarters was a world apart from the motor pools and staging areas Kowalski inhabited. Staff officers moved through elegant rooms with purposeful urgency, managing an entire theater of operations. Maps covered walls, showing the positions of dozens of divisions across France, Belgium, and Germany. The scale of the operation was staggering. Smith's office occupied a converted library. The general sat behind a massive desk covered with reports, maps, and intelligence summaries. He looked exhausted, which made sense given the crisis he was managing. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Sergeant Kowalski, I've read your data. I've read Weber's summary of your proposal. I've also read 16 reports from Transportation Corps explaining why convoy doctrine is optimal and should not be modified. Tell me why they're wrong." Kowalski took a breath and launched into his explanation. He kept it concise, focused on observable facts rather than theory. German pilots targeted formations. Tight spacing multiplied casualties. Dispersion reduced visibility and complicated targeting. Individual trucks moving independently would be harder to spot, harder to intercept, nearly impossible to destroy in groups. The loss rate would drop dramatically. Smith listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Kowalski finished, the general asked a single question. "What about coordination? How do we ensure supplies arrive when and where needed?" This was the central objection, the one every officer had raised. Kowalski had his answer ready. "We coordinate timing instead of spacing. Give each driver a departure time and an arrival window. They maintain speed, follow the route, reach the destination within their window. We track individual vehicles at checkpoints. If someone's late, we know immediately and can respond. We don't need formation integrity. We need temporal precision." Smith studied him for a long moment. "You drove trucks before the war." 15 years, sir. Midwest routes, long-distance hauling. Different cargo, same principles. A truck either delivers on time or it doesn't. How it gets there matters less than whether it arrives. And you think your civilian experience applies to combat logistics? I think physics applies everywhere, sir. Her concentrated target is easier to hit than a dispersed one. That's not military doctrine. That's geometry." Smith almost smiled. "Almost. The Transportation Corps will fight this. They'll cite regulations, training standards, operational requirements. They'll produce studies proving you're wrong. With respect, sir, I've produced data proving I'm right. The difference is my data comes from watching trucks burn." The general stood, walked to the window, looked out at the chateau grounds. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that would anger powerful constituencies. "We're going to test your theory, Sergeant. Small scale initially, 20 trucks operating under your proposed method. If it works, we expand. If it fails, we return to doctrine and you return to driving in formations." "Understood." Kowalski felt something between relief and terror. "Understood, sir. Report to Major Hastings in logistics planning. He'll coordinate the test, you'll help design the procedures, and Sergeant, you better be right, because if this fails, a lot of people will remember who suggested it." Kowalski was in shock. After reading his report, Captain Weber finally spoke. "General Smith wants to see you tomorrow." 10 a.m. at headquarters. Kowalski knew this was his only chance, but there was a growing feeling that if he failed, the opportunity to prove his theory would disappear forever. He needed to be prepared for whatever came next. Major Richard Hastings was not pleased. A career logistics officer with 12 years of service, he had built his reputation on methodical planning and adherence to proven procedures. Now he'd been ordered to test a theory proposed by a sergeant truck driver that contradicted everything Transportation Corps doctrine had established over decades of military experience. Their first meeting, held in a cramped office smelling of coffee and cigarette smoke, established the tension immediately. "Let me be clear, Sergeant," Hastings said, not looking up from the papers on his desk. "I think this is a waste of time and resources. But General Smith wants a test, so we'll conduct a test. My job is to ensure it's done properly, with adequate controls and measurable outcomes. Your job is to explain exactly how you think this suicide mission should work." Kowalski had expected resistance. What he hadn't expected was the depth of institutional resentment his proposal had generated. To officers who had spent careers mastering military logistics, a sergeant suggesting they'd been doing it wrong represented more than tactical disagreement. It was a challenge to their expertise, their training, their professional identity. He laid out the operational framework he'd developed over weeks of observation. 20 trucks would make the run from St. Lo to a forward supply depot near Verdun, approximately 220 miles. Instead of departing as a convoy, trucks would leave at 5-minute intervals. creating a dispersed stream rather than a concentrated formation. Each driver would receive a specific departure time and a 4-hour arrival window. Checkpoints every 50 miles would track progress. No formation requirements, no spacing protocols, no radio communication unless emergency circumstances demanded it. Hastings listened, making notes, his skepticism evident in every line of his posture. When Kowalski finished, the Major began his dissection. Communication. How do we coordinate if trucks can't maintain visual contact? We don't coordinate en route. We coordinate timing. Each driver knows his schedule. Problems get reported at checkpoints. And security. How do individual trucks defend against ambush? Same way convoys do. They don't. We're not equipped for combat. Our security comes from speed and dispersion, not firepower. Accountability. How do we track 20 separate vehicles across 200 miles? Checkpoint system. Each driver signs in at designated points. Missing signatures trigger investigation. We know location and timing for every truck. Maintenance. What happens when a truck breaks down with no convoy support? Same thing that happens now. Driver reports at next checkpoint or uses emergency radio. Recovery vehicles respond. Difference is one breakdown doesn't block 19 other trucks. Hastings worked through objection after objection, probing for weaknesses in the plan. Some concerns were legitimate operational issues. Others felt like attempts to find any reason to reject the proposal. Kowalski answered each question, drawing on his civilian experience and his months of observation. The discussion lasted 3 hours. Finally, Hastings set down his pen. You've thought this through, I'll give you that. But thinking through a plan and executing it successfully are different things. We'll run the test on September 18th. 20 trucks. Experienced drivers only, optimal weather conditions. We'll run a conventional convoy on the same route simultaneously for comparison. Same cargo, same destination, same time frame. The results will speak for themselves. The next 10 days were consumed by preparation. Kowalski worked with Hastings' staff to develop detailed procedures. Checkpoint locations were selected and staffed. Drivers were briefed on the new protocols. Maintenance crews inspected every vehicle twice. The conventional convoy received identical preparation. Everything possible was done to ensure fair comparison. Opposition materialized from unexpected quarters. Other NCOs, loyal to traditional methods, questioned Kowalski's motives. Some suggested he was seeking attention or promotion. Others claimed civilian trucking experience was irrelevant to military operations. A few simply resented the implication that their standard procedures were flawed. Kowalski endured the criticism in silence. The test would prove his case or end the discussion permanently. September 17th, the evening before the test, Kowalski couldn't sleep. He reviewed procedures mentally, checking for oversights, considering contingencies. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. If the test failed, trucks would continue burning and drivers would continue dying. And he would bear partial responsibility for delaying more effective solutions. If it succeeded, he would have challenged doctrine and won, but the victory would anger powerful interests within the Transportation Corps. At 0530 hours on September 18th, 40 trucks assembled at the St. Lo staging area. 20 bore standard convoy markings, 20 carried special test designations. Weather conditions were ideal: clear skies, mild temperature, light winds. Intelligence reports indicated minimal Luftwaffe activity expected along the route. The test would proceed under optimal circumstances. The conventional convoy departed at 0600 hours, 20 trucks in perfect formation, maintaining prescribed spacing, following established protocols. Kowalski watched them roll out, a khaki-colored serpent winding along the Red Ball route, precisely ordered, completely predictable. At 0605, the first test truck departed, then another at 0610, another at 0615. The stream continued, individual vehicles leaving at precise intervals. No formation, no coordination beyond timing. To observers, it looked chaotic, almost random. To Kowalski, it represented calculated dispersion that would make targeting nearly impossible. He departed at 7:30, driving the 10th test vehicle. The sensation was strange after months of convoy operations. No truck ahead to follow, no truck behind providing psychological security. Just open road, his schedule, and his ability to maintain speed and timing, it felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. The first checkpoint came at Alençon, 53 miles into the run. Kowalski arrived within his window, signed the log, noted that 8 trucks had already checked in on schedule. The convoy had passed through 30 minutes earlier, all vehicles accounted for, maintaining formation. At Chartres, the second checkpoint, news arrived that changed everything. German fighters had been spotted along the route ahead. 2 Focke-Wulf 190s making reconnaissance sweeps, probably searching for targets. The conventional convoy, now approximately 20 miles north, was directly in their path. The dispersed test trucks were spread across 60 miles of highway, individual vehicles separated by distance and timing. Kowalski signed the checkpoint log and continued north. Ahead, the test was about to encounter its first real validation. Behind him, radio operators monitored frequencies for distress calls. Above, German pilots searched for the concentrated targets their training had taught them to expect. The experiment was no longer theoretical, it was operational, and lives depended on whether Kowalski had been right. The test was about to begin. Kowalski watched the line of trucks, now scattered, leaving in 5-minute intervals, following a bold plan that defied everything military doctrine had taught. But when the radio crackled with the message, "Enemy planes detected ahead," the real test was about to happen. Will it work? He wondered as he accelerated, the adrenaline taking over. In the following months, Kowalski's theory was tested and refined. His methods, which initially seemed like an audacious proposal from a mere truck driver, were now integrated into the logistical operations of Patton's 3rd Division. The dispersion of vehicles, which had once seemed chaotic, proved to be the key to drastically reducing losses, and the resistance from his superiors was slowly overcome by the practical results on the battlefield. As the convoys followed the new guidelines, the war raged on, but now with an efficiency that few had thought possible. The dispersed dispatch system, simple in its design, saved lives and ensured the troops maintained their momentum against the German forces. Losses dropped to under 5%, while the conventional convoys still faced alarming casualties. However, Kowalski never sought recognition. He knew that his idea had been an important innovation, but for him, the true victory lay in seeing the troops advancing, with supplies arriving on time, sustaining the morale and combat effectiveness of the divisions. He never sought applause or honors. His work was done, and that was enough. It wasn't until after the war that his contribution was officially recognized. In a formal ceremony, Kowalski was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for his logistical innovations. General Smith, in a rare display of appreciation, pointed out that without Kowalski's perseverance, the outcome of the war might have been very different. But for Kowalski, this medal was not the prize he sought. He never sought to be celebrated. His satisfaction came from knowing that WWII, by challenging military doctrine, he had made a difference. In the years that followed, his methodology spread to other theaters of war, and the civilian world also benefited from his innovation. The dispersed dispatch model, though born on the battlefields, was adapted by the world's largest logistics companies, such as Amazon and UPS, revolutionizing the transportation of goods. Kowalski returned to his life as a truck driver, uninterested in being remembered. But in some way, his legacy would live on quietly and effectively in the roads he helped transform forever.